All right, so good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jesse, and I am with Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. If you're joining us for the first time, we are all about bringing conservation, adventure, and science into classrooms around the world. Now, today, we want to welcome all you family, students, science lovers, and more around Canada and around the world, joining us virtually as we take part in this special event to celebrate Science Odyssey and the Million Tree Project. We are hosting today's special discussion with Dr. Jonathan Ferrier in partnership with the Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council of Canada, better known as NSERC. NSERC is Canada's largest supporter of discovery and innovation and a leading promoter of science and engineering to young Canadians. It is also powering the Science Odyssey, Canada's national celebration of science and technology. It's been running since May 6th and continues to May 16th with all kinds of events and activities like the one and discussion that were taking place today online and in communities across the country. You can find a listing with all the fun activities available during Science Odyssey on its website. Let me bring up this banner for you guys at sciod.ca if you haven't checked it out already. We're also celebrating the launch of the Million Tree Project, a new initiative led by Science Rendezvous that promotes tree, environment, and climate science to elementary and secondary school students and encourages Canadians to join in planting, caring for, and conserving 1 million trees by 2030. Before we start our discussion with Jonathan Ferrier, we have a special message from one of Canada's most dedicated supporters of scientific research and innovation. Will Amos, Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Science and Innovation, who's going to help us kick off our broadcast today. So without further ado, let me bring that up for his special welcome message and go for it.
On behalf of the Government of Canada, I want to extend best wishes to everyone participating in this year's Science Odyssey Festival. Grâce aux sciences, à la technologie, à l'ingénierie et aux mathématiques, les Canadiens remarquables améliorent réellement leur communauté, leur carrière et le pays. Through science, technology, engineering, and math, great Canadians are making a real difference in communities, in their careers, and in our country. Their contributions are so important because today more than ever, science matters. We're facing new challenges like climate change, loss of biodiversity, and global pandemics. Nous assistons à d'incroyables percées transformatrices, notamment en intelligence artificielle, en médecine de précision et en informatique quantique. We're also seeing amazing disruptive breakthroughs like artificial intelligence, precision medicine, and quantum computing. Une chose est sûre, peu importe les enjeux ou les débouchés, tout commence par la science. One thing's for sure, whatever the issue and the opportunity, the search for the answer starts with science. Whether this is your first Science Odyssey or you've been on this adventure for a while, the Government of Canada wants you to know we've got your back. Thank you for your participation, your enthusiasm, and your curiosity. Bon festival, profitez-en au maximum. Enjoy the festivities.
Oh, well, how fun was that? Thank you so much to Mr. Amos for an awesome kickoff to our festival. And now we are on to the main event. We are very happy to be joined today by Dr. Jonathan Ferrier from Dalhousie University in Halifax, Nova Scotia. Dr. Ferrier is going to tell us about his career, his research, and his own experiences as a scientist. He is a biologist and an Anishinaabe researcher who takes a scientific look at Indigenous foods, medicine, and cultural matters in an incredibly interesting field called ethnobotany. We're going to learn today about his research and experiments, how he found his path to a career in science, and what advice he would give to students looking to follow in his footsteps. So everyone, please join me in welcoming Dr. Jonathan Ferrier. Jonathan, thank you so much for joining us. And
Ani, chimikwach for having me. Ani bonjour, everyone. Ani bonjour, Jonathan Ferrier, Mississauga, Nishinaabe, Nini, and Disnakas. Nimoshek. Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, Treaty 19 Ojibway. Ahau miigwech Gichimanadu, Mi'kma'ki, Nikanagana, Ahau miigwech. I'd like to acknowledge and thank the Great Spirit, the land I am on, Mi'kma'ki, and our relatives. I send prayers in all directions for healing and our continued good work on the land. Miigwech. I'm a biology professor at Dalhousie University and a teacher on the Board of Education at Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation under the leadership of Councillor Veronica King-Jameson.
Yeah, fantastic, Jonathan. What a beautiful introduction. And thank you so much for spending so much time speaking in your native language. That was beautiful. I want to dive in. We gave a really quick summary of your job description, ethnobotany, which is not a topic we cover very much here on Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. But I wanted to get a little more background from you. So what exactly is ethnobotany and what in particular is interesting about it to you?
Ethnobotany is the study of how people use plants in their spiritual, food, medicine, and material cultures. There's so many wonderful facets of ethnobotany that are interesting to me, including the ecological perspectives that Indigenous people have in their traditional lands and territories. The foods, medicines, and materials from the plant world continue to be a way we can explore the biology of life and the languages they inspire. Finally, many of these stories of our relatives, and I mean plants and animals and our families and communities, they prompt us to explore the biochemical world to fill in our understanding of the biology mechanisms and our Indigenous histories.
That was beautiful. What a neat answer. I love it. Jonathan, I want to get an example from you. What are you researching in your lab right now, and what are you hoping to learn?
Right now, we're gathering the Nishinaabe ethnobotany resources for the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. That's in southern Ontario, situated around the Grand River and the Credit River for perspective. It's near Toronto and Hamilton and Niagara Falls. As I'm an early career researcher, our students, community members, and I are gathering historical Anishinaabe ethnobotany works that describe our uses of plants and their names in our language, Nishinaabe. This is really helpful in helping our community revitalize our language and our ecological relationships. The way we are looking at the historical record is in a quantitative, numerical way called a meta-analysis. This helps our community achieve consensus, agreement on the stories of food, medicine, and material culture that we would like to collectively explore.
Yeah, my fiance is a librarian at Brock University, and so I know all about meta-analysis. It's half of what I hear about in my life. Very, very cool. All right, this is a question that we've been getting from so many students in so many of our programs over the last few months. How has the pandemic affected the way you conduct your day-to-day research?
As a professor in Halifax, Jabukdok Mi'kma'ki, in Nova Scotia, whose community is in southern Ontario, Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, the pandemic has prevented working on the land with knowledge keepers, elders, and community members. So land-based learning is a traditional way that we approach our studies, and the pandemic has prevented me from traveling to my Indigenous territory. So a lot of background and book research for now.
Yeah, well, hopefully we're light at the end of the tunnel again, talking about science and innovation in Canada. Vaccines are being rolled out, so hopefully you get the chance to go back really, really soon, because obviously better to be there in the field if you can be. Now, ethnobotany is something that a lot of our younger students especially won't have heard about when they were a young child. I have a scientific background, and I didn't hear about ethnobotany until I was much older. So how did you first become interested in this field? And was there a moment that made you say, like, yes, I want to do this for the rest of my life?
There were a few moments. That's a great question. As a youngster, my father had us on the land quite a bit. He would take us to marshes to observe all the life there. We call those mashkik. I was fascinated by the relationships beavers had with their environment. My father would explain on the marsh that these relationships were really quite sacred and they must be respected. That was really foundational. That was the big inspiration behind me becoming a biologist. The other aspect was many summers I spent with blueberries. It imprinted the relationship from the taste of an unripe berry to the little white spiders that live in the bushes. That was really quite formative too. When I got to the university, my love for holistic research drew me to David Garbery's botany lab, where he encouraged me to explore my Indigenous medicine culture and to volunteer in a herbarium. It's a library of plants that help us identify the different species that we find on the land.
I absolutely love that you started this with this idea of just falling in love with the natural world that you got to explore and experience. It's something that pretty much unifies every single biologist that we bring on this broadcast. They started by getting out to local parks, to local nature areas. It's something that we explore in so many programs, and I think that's a beautiful answer. We've also recently had a couple programs on two-eyed seeing out in the West Coast with Dr. Andrea Reed talking about the importance of Indigenous culture leading into science. And so we can talk about that more in Q&A later, but I think it's just a beautiful answer. In your personal experience, is there a challenge or a greatest challenge you faced in your path to becoming a scientist, Jonathan?
The greatest challenge I had was probably learning about my family and my community's ethnobotany. My family, unfortunately, was separated from their Mississauga of the Credit First Nation community, and we were assimilated. My grandparents were slaves in the territory on farms just north of Guelph, Ontario. It's a bit sad, but we're doing better, and we're reliving and revitalizing those stories, and now we're getting back to our family clans and names.
Yeah. You know what? One of the things you mentioned at the top of this broadcast that I want to speak to is your Indigenous connection to the land. And one of the things I want to bring this up on a banner actually for all our students today. One thing we've been getting from so many of our programs lately is a willingness and a desire to find out what that background is. Nativeland.ca is something that's been shared by so many of our partners. It's a really beautiful tool. Here in Toronto, I'm on the lands of the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, the Mississaugas, the New Credit, and I know about that from broadcasts like this, getting to speak to that ancestry. So I love that answer. All right. So how did you overcome that challenge? I mean, it's a dark story. It's a complicated story, and it is a big challenge. Is there something that you did personally to help overcome that?
Well, you know, I got through this with a community and a lot of friends and family support. I overcame the challenge mostly by myself with a lot of research, community, and expert consultation. There are historically about 10 nations, as you mentioned, in our territory, but the census record was able to provide key information that led me back to my home community. Now I'm able to ask questions about ethnobotany matters in the heart of our territory in a culturally appropriate way.
Yeah, it's so important. I think that for students these days, for every Canadian, it behooves us all to pay attention to understand that history and to learn more about what's happening both in the past and present, and hopefully, more positive things to come in the future. The Indigenous Peoples Atlas of Canada is something that's produced by Royal Canadian Geographical Society, a really fantastic tool to keep that learning going. Jonathan, as one last or a couple last major questions before we dive in with our students today, is there a piece of advice you wish someone had given you when you just started down your path to becoming a scientist in life science and research?
Becoming a biology professor was a lifelong dream that has come true. While truth and reconciliation continue to improve relationships in Canada and First Nations, one of the quotes that I found memorable was from a scholar, Jesse Thistle. I recall him mentioning to an elder in an interview that he felt a little bit down because he didn't have the guidance of his community elders through parts of his life. His elder let him know that the relationships he had with the land, our relatives, the plants and animals and other people along the way, were indeed his elders guiding him on his journey. That really resonated with me.
I bet it did. We love Jesse. We've actually had him on in our Secret Path Week in conjunction with the Gord Downey Cheney Wenjack Fund. So he's a fantastic speaker. Anyone can follow up this broadcast by checking that out on our YouTube channel as well. So that's a nice personal connection. Thanks, Jonathan. All right. Before we turn it over to our live classes and our tons of folks joining us on YouTube right now, I'd like to ask, what lies ahead for you? What are your research goals for the near term and the longer term? When you get back to go to your traditional territory in person, what really jumps out?
From the historical record and from the land-based learning with community members, I look forward to a post-COVID world where we can work together in person again. So important to us, that experiential learning on the land. Yeah. This will allow us to find community agreement on work in biology that is most needed in our community. In the long term, our community is interested in revitalizing our medicine culture and understanding. And I hope to contribute by understanding the biochemistry of biological mechanisms that contribute to safe and effective use of foods and medicines. In ethnobotany, it's quite a holistic process. Yeah. So much of my work contributes to our community's language goals, and I'm honored to expand our Nishinaabe linguistics in biology.
Oh, Jonathan, this has been such a fun tour so far. Thank you so much for the the heart that you bring to these answers and to your work, and it's just so evident in everything you've been sharing with us. So I really appreciate it. What I'd love to do now, if it's all good with you, is dive in with our live and YouTube classes, take a few questions from them. So let's have a bit of a conversation together. I'm going to start by bringing in Mr. Shattuck. He's joining us in Chalk River, Ontario. So if you guys want to kick us off with a question, Mr. Shattuck, come on in and go for it.
Great. Jonathan, thank you so much for speaking with us today. I was wondering if you might be able to give us an example of maybe a traditional medicine or food, and like how the science actually supports what the First Nations tradition would have taught, the use of this being.
I think an interesting example that's coming about is actually from a plant that came here from Japan, actually. It's called Japanese knotweed. And it's sometimes it's called an invasive species, but with the teachings from Elder Albert Marshall, he gave us this teaching of two-eyed seeing, Etowatmum, really valuing the teachings from all cultures, and I include the plants in those. So this Japanese knotweed, when we, for instance, build a parking lot on the edge, you'll see that a lot of the ground and the land is disturbed. So the Japanese knotweed, it makes a little community there, and it holds together the land. It's really quite special. But what we've also noticed is that this plant is just asking to be used. In its roots, it has such a large concentration of a compound called resveratrol. This is an antioxidant that's really important in diabetes and preventing such diabetic insults from oxidation. The other thing that it's really quite helpful for is treating Lyme disease, which is a big problem where the plant actually grows. So with some polysaccharides from mushrooms and some resveratrol from the roots of Japanese knotweed, you can actually make a formula that can treat a spirochete Lyme infection. That's really a challenge to us living in Mi'kma'ki. Go for that question.
Great question, guys. We had Dr. Wade Davis on recently, and he talked about this amazing ability to find medicines, find foods, and just, draw so much from the land in such a meaningful way. And I think that that's sort of the essence of ethnobotany. It's what you got a chance to share with us today. I have a great follow-up question on this from Ms. Shelton's class. They're joining us in Benicia, California, and they want to know, how do you tell if a plant is safe to eat or not? I mean, you're walking around. Is there a strategy that people could employ to learn this, or what?
This is a great question, a very important question. We actually just had a Gittigan garden project that we address this, and we call the plants that are in our medicinal repertoire, we call it a medicine bundle. And so each of us inherit different medicines from the elders and different knowledge keepers that are experts in their medicines. And so the safety comes with their knowledge. So we're always advising our learners to go back and consult with your elders, really do the work. Another interesting thing where mathematics can come in is if we're trying to fill in that historical knowledge to a greater extent, is when we have a lot of people agreeing that the plant is useful for a certain medicine or a certain food use, the higher the number, it's quite often indicative that it's both safe and effective. So that's why mathematics and indices like informing consensus values are really important.
Yeah, fantastic, Jonathan. All right, let's head to Miss Alabakopoulos. They're joining us at Kathy Weaver School here in Ontario with their grade 3s. Come on in and share away.
Hi, thanks so much for having us. I was just wondering if you could tell me if there are any indigenous plants that are currently being used in modern medicine today.
One of the plants that I have such a fond relationship with is blueberry. There are many uses for blueberries, including antioxidants, and one of the uses that I was privileged to get to learn about was the anti-diabetic use of vaccinium leaves, the blueberry leaves. So traditional health practitioners in Quebec, Nishinaabe territory, are using blueberries to treat vaccinium. Some of my work at the Ottawa Hospital expanded on this idea, and we looked at how diabetes related to a maternal disease called preeclampsia. So we learned that the blueberry leaf was actually quite effective at helping the placenta grow and implant into the uterus. And this really helps mothers move along their pregnancy in a really helpful way and avoid preeclampsia, where the only treatment is, unfortunately, cesarean section.
There's a great follow-up question to this that just came in on YouTube before I go live to our group joining us all the way in Colombia. Mr. Sermales' class in Toronto wants to know, are there some diseases that Indigenous medicines can help cure? So you talked about preeclampsia. Is there anything else that really jumps out that some of our students and teachers might be familiar with?
Well, diabetes, like I said, is a big one. And a lot of our communities are experiencing diabetes because we're moving away from our traditional foods and our traditional recipes. So when we get back to those traditional foods and our traditional ways of life on the land, those plants and those natural products found in those plants are really a way that we can move forward in a safe and effective way treating diabetes or preventing diabetes, and having a healthy community move forward with their repertoire of plants while speaking to them in their language as they relate and collect them through ceremony and harvesting protocols.
Awesome, Jonathan. All right, we're going to go all the way to Colombia, several thousand kilometers away for a 5th semester pharmacy program with Mr. Menezes. So come on in, guys, and I'd love to hear your question.
Hi, thank you for having us here. Well, I have a couple of questions. One coming from my students. I'm actually broadcasting these presentation with my students. The first one is we also had that like a kind of painful relation with our native, with the local communities. I would like to have like some kind of advice to guide that healing process between, native indigenous communities and Colombian society, because we know that we have a lot of opportunities in rescuing all that ancestral knowledge on chemicals, compounds, and how can we cooperate also in the healing process in science and in the scientific process at the same time.
I'm going to try to answer your best question as best I can. You were a little fuzzy coming in, but I think I've got it. And I'm going to tell you a little story that we had. We had a wonderful experience with the Cree of Ojibway and the Kekshi Maya working together. And what we did was we brought each of these communities together, and we had published papers together, and we had community events where we flew each other in, and we learned about what the shared problems were between each of our community while trying to mitigate diabetes. And then we learned about how we uniquely approached each of those situations in our communities. And we were able to learn quite a bit from each other and come up with novel ways within our communities for treating diabetes, preventing diabetes, and working on the land to really honor the relationship that we have with those medicinal plants and those traditional foods.
What a unique question. So thank you so much for that, Eric. And what again, beautiful opportunity to share some cross-cultural attempts to reconcile Indigenous knowledge and communities with, I guess, the government and general society in both Colombia and Canada today. So thank you for that, Jonathan, as well. That was beautiful. Guys, I want to do another round of questions with our live groups, maybe take a couple more from YouTube, and then we've got a special ending of the broadcast as well. So Mr. Shattuck, if you want to come back in for another question, go for it.
Great. Jonathan, one of the things we've been talking about in our history class right now is the impact of being forced off of traditional lands and out of traditional ways of life during the 1800s in British North America. I've explained to students that many First Nations cultures were really impacted this, but just a change in diet and lifestyle and things like that. I was wondering if you could maybe expand on that a little bit, like how would this change of diet or of life really impact the people scientifically or historically, or if you could just expand on that at all.
Mm-hmm. That's a really important question. So I can take I can provide an example from my community and from my family and from our ancestral territory. What happens in Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation is historically we moved with the seasons and with the food. So what we would do is after the snow melted and the ice melted, we would collect our sweet water, our maple syrup, and that was up in the woodlands just north of Guelph. And then when that was over, we would migrate back down to Lake Ontario, and we'd be fishing, collecting medicines, collecting different herbs and foods from the land, again preparing for the winter, following that calendar, the traditional calendar that we can find on the turtle shell. Look into the turtle shell calendar. So then what we did was we would wait for the salmon run to come, and then we'd follow the salmon back up the river, and then back into our cedar and sugar bush territory, where we could continue to ice fish and harvest wild rice and basically wait for the winter come. These northern woodland territories were also where we hunted elk, deer, and so that was really part of the whole process. Now, when we were removed from our traditional territories, like our hunting territory, then we were disconnected from a large part of our traditional food system. And that had a lot of impact. So what we're doing now is we're revitalizing our connection to the land. And one of the ways that we're doing that is by looking at the land and figuring out what our Nishinaabe names were for the places in the territory. And those indigenous names of different territories, they are really an ecological blueprint for solving so many problems, like our food, our medicine, also the climate crisis, the biodiversity crisis. Those indigenous names are basically an ecological inspiration on how we can achieve balance in all of these areas. It's a very important question.
We could do we could do many broadcasts on that question. So I'm really glad, Mr. Shattuck, that you shared that with us. One thing that I've enjoyed seeing personally is I don't have as much knowledge as Jonathan by a million miles about traditional plants and territories, but it's interesting to see, Mount McKinley becoming Denali, Ayers Rock becoming Uluru, and these traditional names for some of these iconic locations in places around the globe become standard. And I think that's been a really important thing to push these back into the stewardship of the traditional peoples in these territories. And the name goes a long way to beginning that process. So I'm really glad that you mentioned that. Guys, we've got time for, I think, 4 more questions or so before we dive in with our last little bit on the Million Tree Project, which I'm really excited about. Quickly from YouTube, we've got one about fungi. We've talked about plants a lot today, but Mr. Howie wants to know, do you incorporate mushrooms into this, medicinal mushrooms of any kind or anything else in your research?
There's a lot of mushroom knowledge that's coming about. Some of the oldest examples that I have is that in some of the bracket fungi that grew on the trees, these fungi were actually a vehicle for transporting fire. So we used fungi to transport fire by carving out little holes in the fungi and moving those coals as such. Another thing about fungi that's really wonderful is its capability to heal wounds. So there's a lot of knowledge that goes around using fungi to heal the wounds by placing it inside it, and sometimes even putting it with gunpowder and letting it take care of infections. Also, there's fungi from the land that are used in mental health now. So some of these compounds are quite spiritual, and they can help us address mental health problems by seeing the world in a new way. And that's a very exciting field in ethnobotany circles. Great question.
I would say so. I learned pretty much everything from that. I also think the next time we do this broadcast, we should call it fire mushrooms and gunpowder healing, because we get so many more kids. All right, one more question from YouTube, and then we'll go back to Ms. Alabakopoulos and Mr. Menezes before we wrap up. Ms. Shelton's class wanted to know, how long have you spent time studying plants in Canada, and do you do this largely in the wild, or do you have a garden where you can cultivate these and study them that way?
I've been in a relationship with plants. My earliest relationship is probably blueberries. I remember the first time that I found mountain cranberry in a muskeg down below my home. Oh, I must have been 3 or 4 years old, just exploring in the field by myself, and having a nature book and saying, "Oh, look, that's the name of that plant. Dad, can you tell me what it's said about this plant?" And that was sort of my first investigations and relationships with those species. Professionally, I've been probably at it for a little over 2 decades now. And, not just in Canada, but all over the world. I've worked with people all over Turtle Island, with the Kekshi Maya, the Quiche Maya, the Mijikenda, the Gediyama of Kenya, some of the last tribes of Europe, and all of those people I acknowledge in my talks, and I'm very grateful for all of the lessons that I've received over the years.
You are so reverent of the people and colleagues and things that you've gotten a chance to do in your life, and it's really a beautiful thing within this presentation. So thank you for that personally, Jonathan. Let's head back to Ms. Alabakopoulos and go to Mr. Menezes in a minute. Come on back in, guys.
Hi, thank you. I actually had a question because I love to garden, and I'm curious if you have a garden of your own and what type of specimens you keep in your garden.
So right now I'm growing a garden in the research lab, and one of the really cool plants that I have in our garden is called the pawpaw, Asimina triloba, and it's North America's largest fruit, and it's a Carolinian species, and its most northern range is up in probably just about to Toronto, not quite Toronto, just a little south of Toronto. And so the plant has a male and a female, and you need them both to actually make seeds. But the seeds of the pawpaw we investigated the seeds of the pawpaw for anti-cancer purposes, and the fruit of the pawpaw, it's like no other. It's like a custard mango, if I could describe it anyway. So that's one of the very special plants that we have growing in the greenhouse. We also have a garden outside Dalhousie Life Science Center that's being created that incorporates pollinators and honors the different plants of the area. And so plants like white spruce, birch, blueberries, all kinds of different berry plants and herbs. And yes, so many to mention, all wonderful relatives to have around you.
I don't think many of us will end up quite as enthused as Jonathan about plants looking wistfully into the middle distance of what everyone he mentions. But as a shameless plug, Green Planet is coming out next year on BBC, and there's going to be an entire documentary series all on the magic and wonder of the plant world. So maybe by watching that, we can become half as excited as Jonathan is, because this has been so special today. Let's head back to Colombia for one last question before we dive with Million Trees. Mr. Menezes, come on back in and take us away. Oh, unmute your mic. There we go. The classic video call.
Yes, sorry about that again. Thank you again. I have a question from one student. He's called Carlos. He's saying in the question that we have that huge biodiversity here in Colombia, usually in South America, and he's a pharmacy student, and he's asking about how to keep that like a good balance between uses of medicinal plants and conservation, keeping that biodiversity alive and without harming like the environment at the same time.
Mm-hmm. That's a really important question. Of course, the biodiversity benefits when we honor those relatives and we look into how important they are in our traditional ecologic and economic systems. One of the ways that I find is a really effective way of honoring that biodiversity is by working with the communities that really have a very strong and close relationship with these relatives. I think the fact that many Indigenous people acknowledge plants as their relatives goes a long way into biodiversity conservation and protection. So I would advise to go to those Indigenous communities and work with the people that really have a long-term relationship and a language built around and inspired by those relatives. Great question.
What a program, Dr. Ferrier. Thank you so much for spending some time with us today, sharing your enthusiasm, your passion, your knowledge. It's been really fantastic. And I know we've got enough questions in YouTube and live to last for 10 broadcasts, but I just want to say a personal thank you for all you shared with us today. This was great.
Me glad as well. Thank you so much for having me. Really quite an honor.
Awesome, man. Well, before we wrap up the broadcast today, I mentioned at the top that we were going to do sort of a joint double thing, highlighting some really cool programs coming up with Science Odyssey. And so I want to turn it over to our next speaker today to learn a little bit more about the Million Tree Project that's just been launched. So we are joined live by Katie Miller, the Executive Director of Science Rendezvous, who's going to tell you a little bit about how you can get involved in the fantastic Million Tree Project. So without further ado, Katie, come on in. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me. I am, as Jesse said, I'm from Science Rendezvous, which is a big national science festival that happens all on the same day, always the day before Mother's Day at most of the major colleges and universities across the country. So basically what happens is all of our teams at these universities try to create the most fun and exciting hands-on science festivals that we can dream up, whether that's incorporating liquid nitrogen ice cream and explosive shows and non-Newtonian fluid dashes across the courtyard. It's an opportunity for you to go to the places where research happens, meet real researchers and scientists, and just have fun with STEM as much as possible. This year, obviously, we did not have an in-person event, but we had a really cool national science chase that all of our teams, so our team up in Inuvik and our team in Labrador City and our team in British Columbia and our team on the East Coast and down in Toronto, we all created locally relevant science challenges. So each site had challenges, you collected points and you dashed across the country to collect points. So that was what we did this year. It's still live, it's still open. If you guys want to do it as a class and check out a few different checkpoints, you're welcome to at sciencerendezvous.ca. Now, we were just kind of mentioning that we were starting this new project. So every year associated with these events, we run these big Canada-wide experiments. The idea is we have all these great teams across the country, and we work with all these great people, and we invite you guys all into these places where science happens, and we want to actually, get together and do real projects. So our first one we ever did was a high altitude balloon experiment that we showcased at our science chase. So Jesse, if you want to share my screen, I was just going to do a little video to demonstrate what that was, because I just think it's so cool.
You are all good to go. Yeah.
So that was the one of the launches that was up in that was launched in Inuvik up by past the tree line in the Arctic Circle there. So that was just a really cool experiment. There was 35 launches that happened during that year, and we were able to do some real research with the results and publish a paper. So that was a neat thing that happened for Science Rendezvous for about 3 years. The next Canada-wide experiment that we did was a water quality assessment kit that traveled all across the country. It was especially valuable up in some of the more northern and remote communities that don't necessarily have a lot of hands-on opportunities to have resources to do STEM activities. So, and they were able to test their own water directly and see how it compared across the country. So that was the second one. And then for the third one, we've decided to come back to the land, find a project that we can all get behind. And that has become the Million Tree Project. The main goal of the Million Tree Project is to have 1 million conversations about tree science, climate science, environment science, and to create action. So I think that all of you watching will agree that trees are really incredible, whether it was your first art project when you drew a picture of a tree, or you have a special tree that you can imagine climbing in your backyard or in a park somewhere. Whether you go camping and enjoy your forest bathing, we all have a special connection with trees, I think. And so that's where this project has come about. And the idea is that we work with researchers to help provide really great resources and activities that you can all be a part of. So I wanted to also share my screen so I can give you a bit of a tour of the website. Let me just get to that tab, sorry. Okay, so the Million Tree Project website is a great resource. We've already had over 7,000 activities and 60 tree planted, and we just launched this project about a week ago, not even, last Saturday. One of the projects that we had that was really cool too is people decided to do a backyard bio project where they took pictures of their favorite trees, gave it a tree hug, while they were also doing a scavenger hunt trash pickup in their local community. So they were able to collect over 750 bags of garbage, cleaning up their local area, as well as taking part in the Million Tree Project. If you're looking for resources, this is a little introduction about how it all works, why it's local. Everything needs to be locally appropriate. So, we work with all sorts of partners and researchers across the country so that what we're doing around the country makes sense. And this can be international. I know we have some groups from Colombia, and that, getting involved in the Million Tree Project, nature doesn't have borders. So in science doesn't really have borders either. And we obviously encourage everyone to participate. The overview here is just some fun facts about the Million Trees, some kind of cool information about, the emblems of Canada, the different trees that are associated with the provinces and territories, different forest regions, some fun things to kind of go through there. And then our resources have some really great information that we've worked with various scientists and researchers and First Nations to help develop some nationally relevant information as a launching point. And each of these points here will actually grow over the 10 years of this project. So, working with researchers like Jonathan, hopefully we can continue to expand on our information that we have and grow this in a way that's easy for everyone to access as they are participating. Here we have all the activities that you can get your hands on so far. And again, if you have other great ideas like that scavenger hunt, garbage pickup, backyard bio, every action counts, and we will showcase it on our gallery system and can help support you in any way that we can. But the idea, obviously, if we can, is to try to plant trees, because we know that, in terms of a nature-based climate change solution, trees and land grasses and shrubbery and all these things are really an important part of that conversation, and we want to encourage everyone to do something like that if they're able. And if not, we have lots of other opportunities to continue reading with various books, take pictures, just get involved however makes sense for you, your classrooms and your communities. And for the teachers, we have developed some lesson plans as well. So they're divided by primary, junior, and intermediate. They were developed by some teacher candidates from Queen's University and are tied into all of the provinces. So if you're looking for fun activities to get your class involved, then you can come to this resource center and find some lessons that involve, maybe not even just planting a tree. You can be a part of seed collecting and starting local seed banks in your community and other things like that. Download the whole Million Tree Project manual, or you can even request printed versions shortly as well. So that's where all of this comes down here. Is if you planted trees, you can register them, register activities, request resources, etc.
Fantastic. Katie, what an amazing program. You guys, between you and Jonathan, I feel really lazy. There's so much going on. It's incredible. You also highlighted the author in a few of those things. We just did a program last week with Lindsay Carmichael, who wrote The Boreal Forest, a really amazing program highlighting sort of the central book of the Million Tree Project. So I hope people have the chance to check that out, check out your resources. We've already got our class in Columbia saying that they're going to tune in and take part. So we've gone intercontinental, Katie. It's pretty exciting.
It's amazing.
What I want to do now, time flies and we're having fun, people. We are nearing the end of the broadcast. So what I want to do is just share a few quick links for everybody to keep the learning going. Again, this whole program has been made possible by NSERC, Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council of Canada. So a huge thanks to them. I really encourage our entire audience today to check out sciod.ca to see all the events in the last few days of Science Odyssey coming up, more amazing virtual programs like this and beyond. If you want to learn more about Jonathan, his website is jonathanferrier.me. Check that out. You can learn more about his amazing work on ethnobotany and beyond. And then our full slate. I know Katie just finished showing it all to us, but head to sciencerendezvous.ca. Specifically on the Million Tree Project, you can go to their slightly longer Million Tree Project website subheading and check out hashtag Million Tree Project as well on Twitter. We also got the chance, as Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants this month, to launch our Backyard Bio Global Nature campaign. So if you want to connect with kids around the world and sharing your local love of wildlife, hashtag Backyard Bio or backyardbio.net. And in just a little over 10 days, we are launching our Global Biodiversity Festival, the biggest conservation festival of all time, with over 150 programs in 3 days, all in support of conservation programs and groups around the world. So tons to keep the learning going with. I just want to say a huge thank you to everyone and bring in all our speakers and our teachers to say a big farewell and thank you. So Katie, Jonathan, Mr. Shattuck, Mr. Menezes, Miss Alabakopoulos, welcome and thank you guys so much for a great program today.